You can come out now, Bernadette Wilkins hissed in the long, dark corridor, and could see the small flame of the candle she was carrying shaking from her own breath. It was flickering and dancing, and Bernadette suddenly felt just the same way she had when she'd been but a child, standing in this corridor, talking to what she had thought was nothing more than an imaginary friend. But reality had soon cured her of that notion. Avaricia, come out. It's just the two of us now. Her voice echoed back from the walls that were almost covered in portraits and old ornate mirrors. She could see her ancestors staring out from the paintings while the flickering flame gave them, one by one, strange and stern expressions. Still, she got no answer. Typical, Bernadette thought and straightened out her shoulders. She took another long step and found herself in front of one of the mirrors. It would answer her soon, she knew. Not right away, of course, since this thing had a mind, and by God, a giant ego of its own. It wasn't a dog that would come at the first command, no. This entity was older than her family's estate, and far more knowledgeable than she could even imagine. Bernadette remembered the talks she'd had with her mother, back when she'd been around 10 years old. About Ava, her imaginary friend, and what it meant to call out this name in these halls. It had been Bernadette's mother who had instilled this fear in her that still lingered to this day. But tonight, she needed to face it once and for all. This thing, Avaricia, had been with her family for centuries, had watched over them all, helped them and supported them, while at the same time keeping them shackled, scared, and weak. It had been her great and so on grandfather who had started this whole mess, back long before there had been cars or asphalt, electricity or phones. He, bearing the name of Hamlin Wilkins, had been nothing but a poor day laborer in what was a medieval city, living on the edge of society, fighting day after day to get enough food not to starve. Bernadette's mother had made sure she knew that Hamlin wasn't dumb, though. To the contrary, her ancestor just had the bad fortune of living during a time when your lot in life was almost completely predetermined by what class you had been born into. Not so different from today, Bernadette thought with a chuckle and lifted the candle. Hamlin hadn't given up, though. He had taught himself to read and even how to write a few words. All of that while working 16-hour days, from carrying carrion to dumping refuse to scrubbing the abattoirs of the city. He had dreamed of a better life and had done everything in his power to make it happen. For years, decades, he had almost killed himself like that, until one day fate finally smiled upon him. During one of the odd jobs in the evening, while cleaning up a burned-out home after a fire, he had finally found something. A book, bound in leather, singed by the flames, but otherwise not destroyed in the least. Hamlin had been smart enough to know not to let anyone else see him take anything from the burned-out wreckage, so he hid the book and only returned later in the middle of the night to retrieve it. According to her mother, it had taken him almost a year until he finally understood what he had gotten hold of. Not only was this book pretty much priceless, but the contents of the grimoire were heretical enough to bring the Inquisition to the city, if there ever was a single rumor of its existence. So, He had continued to keep it locked up under the floorboards of his small hut, while he slowly and meticulously deciphered its contents. He must have had help, somehow. It would have been completely impossible otherwise, but Hamlin Wilkins never once talked about how exactly he managed to decipher such a text on his own. Not even to his children. Then, one day, he had done it for real. Had made a contract with a demon. And from then on, his luck changed. Instead of continuing to work as a day laborer, he opened a business of his own. And, as if by a miracle, it flourished almost overnight. Gone were the days when he had to break his back pushing heavy carts through ankle-deep muck. And instead, he became the one to hire people to do the work for him. His little transporting company grew by leaps and bounds, since no matter how hard the jobs were or what they had to deliver, he and his men didn't fail at a single task. Of course, most of it was down to the fact that he did indeed have the devil on his shoulder, protecting him and his men from everything, while sabotaging the competition. But back then, no one dared to utter such a blasphemous thought. The spot where his hut had stood, just outside the city walls, changed into a beautiful townhouse, then into a mansion, while the company grew and grew. During the Black Plague, it was Hamlin and his men who took care of the dead inside the city, carrying them out and dumping them into the mass graves. Of course, Bernadette's ancestor took his fair share of the deceased's belongings, which only made the family's fortune swell even more. And again, no one dared say anything against him, at least openly. There was even a line in one of the historical texts about the tireless work Hamlin Wilkins and his men did to clear out the dead and save the city from complete annihilation. Bernadette smirked again. Yeah, what a brave hero her ancestor had been. He must have known that the demon would protect him and his men, which let them loot and plunder all the houses that suddenly stood empty. Still, she couldn't really fault him for it all. For all those ruthless acts, he actually had managed to make his dreams come true. The Wilkins family had established itself, and by the turn of the next century, it almost looked to be on par with all the other rich and historied clans around the area. Hamlin found a wife soon after, and had 3 sons and 2 daughters with her. Which, as Bernadette now knew, led to the next part of the pact with the demon. The oldest son died when he was 6. He fell from a window during the night and broke his neck right at the front steps. The youngest son drowned in a pool. One daughter got trampled by a horse, while the other died in the crib. Only one child survived, the second son, Jonah. He never got sick, never even got hurt, according to Hamlin's diary, while all those around him seemed to draw in every single ounce of bad luck possible. Only, it wasn't just misfortune. It was the demon's due. Bernadette wasn't sure if she should laugh or cry about it. Her ancestor must have known and understood the contents of the deal, right? A force like that, one capable of pulling a man out of the muck and establishing him as an aristocrat in less than 20 years, wouldn't work for free. And that was its price. The lives of his children. The demon Avaricia would continue to protect the bloodline, but would make damn sure that there would be no branches on the family tree. One child per generation would be allowed to live and grow, while the rest would wither and die. Hamlin's wife took her own life after the death of her youngest daughter. The poor woman probably never knew the reason why the family seemed so fortunate on the one hand, yet cursed on the other. Maybe that was something done by the demon as well. Bernadette knew just how powerful this thing was. She had seen people around her suffering under its wrath. Her own brother had died like that, plagued by dreams and visions for years. Whatever the case, Hamlin himself didn't make it much further. He died in bed, surrounded by his employees and accompanied by his son, who would then take over the family. That must have been one strange sight, Bernadette thought to herself. The only people in attendance of the great founder of the house were his labourers and the staff. She shuddered and felt the eyes of one of the paintings following her through the flickering of the candle in her hand. She didn't have to think long or hard about who those belonged to. Jonah Wilkins, the second head of the household. He had a far easier start than his father, yet seemed far less friendly as well. Under his leadership, the company almost exploded. New branches with Wilkins' name appeared in all the cities around, and as far as Bernadette knew, Jonah was the one who personally oversaw each and every expansion. A few years ago, she had gone through the hard work of compiling a real history of the household and had taken her time to dig into the company and its roots as well. 7 new branches appeared in the first 10 years of Jonah's reign. An insane amount, since it was done completely without the internet or cars or anything. There were a few paintings of him and his men gathering supplies, then sending off on big wagons, heading for another city to conquer. 3 of those new branches were founded in the territories of other, long-established companies, but Jonah never cared. One after another, they all pretty much disappeared. Bernadette had spent an inordinate amount of money to dig into it, but the information still available from that time was scarce at best. Only one, a very, very old outfit, had managed to save its books and ledgers, which then were passed down through the ages. What Bernadette had learned was that suddenly, from one year to the next, this company had experienced the mother of all unlucky streaks. They had lost 15% of their wagons through what looked like normal means. Broken axles, lost parts, the like. Then, almost a third of the staff up and vanished without a trace. It had been sudden enough that Bernadette could almost pinpoint an exact date from when the company had started hiring anyone else willing to do the work. Afterward, fires began breaking out in their offices and warehouses. People blamed the newly recruited men for that, but Bernadette was pretty much certain that wasn't the case. The company lost its 2 biggest warehouses, stocked up in blazing infernos that seemed to die down before they could spread out from the single buildings. And all the while, Jonah Wilkins must have been close by, taking over bit by bit. They must have known something was up with that, right? But then again, what could they have done? Openly accusing Jonah of being in league with the devil would have pretty much broken the societal norms back then, no matter how truthful those charges would have been. Hidden in the ledgers were some expenses for countermeasures. At least 3 times, they had tried to pay some hoodlums with thugs to attack Jonah directly and indirectly. But none of those instances seemed to have borne fruit. They probably ran into unexpected troubles along the way. Whatever the case, her family's company expanded and grew and pushed out all the other bigger players. Jonah had 2 sons and 1 daughter, and the same thing as before happened again. Both sons died before they could even reach puberty, and only the daughter survived. Bernadette had looked through her family tree with all the pruned branches to find some kind of pattern, to finally see why this child was chosen and not that. But she still couldn't see a definitive reason. Maybe it really was the demon deciding in a spur-of-the-moment fashion who to spare and who to kill. Another shiver ran up her spine. Was that really the reason why she was now standing here instead of her brother? She shook her head softly, then blinked and stared straight into the mirror in front of her. The history of this house, of her family, it didn't matter at all, she told herself. What she had come here to do, what she intended to accomplish, it all would crumble into nothing soon anyway. "Come out, Ava," Bernadette repeated again, and could see the flame flickering softly once more. "As you know, I've sent the staff home already. They won't be coming back for a few days. There is no one left in this house besides you and me, and we need to have a conversation." She could feel the hair on the back of her hand standing up as a soft breeze seemed to blow along the hallway. "You've already taken my mother and my father, my brother and anyone else. Come out and face me." Her throat felt dry and her voice seemed to waver, because even though all she could see was her own reflection in the mirror, Bernadette knew deep down that she wasn't alone anymore. This presence had filled up the hallway, a malevolent force whirling around her. Another breeze blew through the hallway, this time almost hard enough to extinguish the light in her hand, before off to her side, a door opened with a long and unsettling creak. An invitation. Bernadette grimaced as she turned and started walking. The portraits of her ancestors passed by in the almost darkness, giving their stares a strangely hostile edge. What would they say if they could watch her right now? Many of them would be appalled, probably. It was the duty of the head of the house to continue on the legacy and to push forward. To have children and let the demon take all but one. Bernadette wanted to spit at the paintings, to scream at them. They all had gone along with this malevolent thing that had taken the true reins of the family all those centuries ago. They had lived their lives, worked and continued on as if everything was okay. And for what? A bigger house? Money? Power? They all had simply closed their eyes to the truth and had sacrificed their offspring to keep this demon happy and on their side. This would stop now. All of it. Bernadette felt another chill as the temperature around her seemed to drop even further with every step she took. The demon knew that something was up. There was no doubt about that in her mind. Bernadette had seen it walking these halls for decades now. Long before her mother and father had passed, even before her brother had died, screaming and clutching his chest in absolute terror. Why had no one else ever done anything against it? Mom and Dad had watched one of their children die without lifting a finger. And all the men and women that had come before as well. How could any of them have gotten a single night of rest when they all knew what they had done? Bernadette reached the open door that was normally covered by a panel in the wall and looked down the tight and winding stairs leading toward one of the hidden rooms on the first floor. The really old part of this house was opening up in front of her. That was something people usually never saw. There were no keys or locks, only closed-up hidden entrances that could be opened from the inside. It was the secret underbelly of this mansion. Just like the demon had taken its place beneath her family, it also had its domain inside this house. Bernadette swallowed hard. When she'd been 6 years old, she had seen this thing during a stormy night, standing right where she stood now, and had thought of it as a friend. She had spent days walking around the mansion, always on the lookout for it, and had found its traces everywhere. Sometimes it would walk past her. Other times it stood in the deepest shadows. She had never felt threatened or uneasy when looking at it back then, but today, thinking about it filled her with dread. Maybe it had already decided that it would let her live back then. That her brother would be more fun to kill. But Bernadette couldn't help but feel guilty nonetheless. Some part of her told her that she had done something, even if it was inadvertently, to make the demon take him instead of her. When her mom had realized that she was stalking and talking with the entity, she had pulled her aside and clued her in on at least the less dark parts of why this thing was here, and that it wasn't something one should play with. Bernadette hadn't truly understood the horror until much, much later. But even as a child, she had started feeling this strange dread anytime she had walked through this hallway. She had only realized how bad it was around the time her brother's nightmares had started up. Seeing him change from a bright, funny kid into this trembling, pale mess had done something to her as well. She had tried talking to her parents, had even begged one of the maids for help, but they all had simply told her to drop it, that there was nothing anyone could do to save him. Bernadette growled at the memory, then forced herself to stop staring into the air and put down her foot. The coldness of the stairs seeped through her slippers as she slowly started descending down the winding steps. She could feel it even more clearly here. Avaricia, the demon of greed. What a fitting patron saint of this household, Bernadette thought with a snarl. The walls on either side of her were grey and blank. The stairwell looked like it would belong to a castle, or some medieval dungeon more than a modern mansion. Never before had she dared walk into one of the hidden paths, especially alone and at night, but Bernadette had to remind herself that it wasn't her prerogative now. The demon had chosen her to carry on the legacy, which meant this all solely belonged to her now. She concentrated on the light in front of her chest to stop her thoughts from spiraling completely out of control. The walls were getting closer the deeper she got. It reminded her of a mausoleum, a final resting place. No, the demon wouldn't hurt her. If she died, the whole family would cease to exist. It needed her. Bernadette felt a gust of wind as below her another door flew open. She could feel the presence now so clearly. It felt like this thing was breathing down her neck. With the light shaking in her hands, she rounded the last two bends, then stopped as she saw the open door, and in it, a shadow that lingered, even though the flame in her hand had banished all the rest already. It was here. There was no doubt about it. Staring at her. Bernadette reminded herself of what was at stake, held her breath, and walked through the waiting shadow. Ice-cold air seemed to cling to her skin for a moment, but she now clearly felt that this presence was right on top of her, moving with her. She tried to concentrate on something else, otherwise she knew the candle might fall from her grasp, which would leave her completely alone with this thing, in the dark. The room she was entering seemed strange. It wasn't as beautiful or big as the others, felt transported here from a time long, long ago. Right at first glance, Bernadette realized that the walls surrounding her were made of wood, and a cheap one at that. There was no light bulb hanging here, nothing but rough stone on the ground and wooden planks as walls. She stopped her feet after a few steps and slowly turned around. So, this is Hamlin's old hut, right? She asked, as if she expected an answer. An unseen, elongated fingernail softly scraped across her cheek. Bernadette didn't let it show on her face, but that touch had almost made her screech. Yes, this room was probably what the old hut had looked like. She could even see a single window, but behind it, a wall of bricks. Hamlin had gone through the trouble of having this old hut encased and almost sealed off while the house had grown. Then, Bernadette took 3 quick steps toward the middle of the room and looked closely at the rough stone floor. There it was, in the corner. Markings and blood. A circle with strange symbols. She could feel the unseen hand resting on her shoulder now. That's the contract? The thing didn't need to answer her for her to know that it was the truth. Was that the reason why he had kept the hut in here? She took another step and could see it more clearly in the weak light of the candle. Blood was on the floor, but it didn't look old and dried out. To the contrary. Bernadette could see the red liquid still shimmering wetly in the light of the flame. It even smelled like blood in here. This metallic stench seemed to seep into her nose and cling to her tongue. So this was from when he pulled you into this world, right? She realized she was babbling uselessly, but her body was shaking and her mind seemed to fray. It was standing right beside her. The demon. Its hand was firmly planted on her shoulder. Bernadette realized that she hadn't thought it through at all. What should she do here? She wanted to make it stop. But would that happen if she destroyed the contract? Or was there something else she was missing? Without the book and years of research, she couldn't know. So, she would have to trust her instincts. She tried to take another step toward the blood on the floor, but the hand on her shoulder yanked her back roughly. Bernadette felt hope for the first time that night. This thing didn't want her anywhere near the circle, which meant she could do something about the contract right? Did Hamlin promise you his offspring? All of them? And their children as well? The only answer she got was her own rapid breathing, followed by a twinge of pain as a long claw dug into her shoulder for a moment. Don't you think you were too greedy? How many of my people have you killed? The hand pulled at her, and Bernadette felt herself getting dragged back. This time, it was using more force, stabbing its claws deeper into her shoulder. She tried to shake it off, but the demon roughly pushed her back even further. This has to stop, Bernadette growled and stomped on the floor, and suddenly the feeling of the demon's hand on her body disappeared. Haven't you taken enough? My parents, my brother. In the silence and the flickering light, Bernadette felt like she could hear a faint voice laughing. Her whole body was shaking as she straightened up and looked around defiantly. She already knew what the thing would be saying if it could. Look around at your family's beginning. A tiny, dirty hut. Her ancestor had built a mansion on top of it, had amassed this wealth, and all it had cost him were the lives of a few people. Bernadette felt sick to her stomach. She knew what was expected of her. Get a partner, have children, then enjoy the next years until one of her offspring was old enough to take over the family, then die. She would have to sacrifice herself, her partner, and all but one of her kids. But the family would continue on. They would never go hungry, never freeze. The demon would make sure the family would thrive. But that wasn't right. They would never be free. I dissolved the contract, she screamed, and this time the laughter of the thing was loud enough to shake the wooden planks surrounding her. Bernadette felt blood rushing into her ears. Just saying it wouldn't be enough. I want you to leave. The thing cackled again. How many others had tried it? She asked herself. How many of her ancestors had wanted to stop it all? She couldn't be the first, right? But none had succeeded. At least that much was clear. She could still see the wooden planks moving in the flickering light, but now the shadows seemed to form what looked like fingers along the walls. Leave us the fuck alone! Bernadette cried out and heard the laughing once more. She couldn't take it anymore and wanted to simply run away. But in her mind, she knew that she hadn't managed to do anything at all. The contract was still in effect. The demon would sooner or later take her and her children. Her hand touched her belly. She couldn't let that happen. Leave! Bernadette howled, and during the braying laughter, she felt a hot tear running down her cheek. Her shoulder was moving back. The light of the candle almost disappeared as she turned and faced the corner where the blood was still on the floor. Please, work. She prayed in her mind, but the maniacal laughter finally stopped for a moment. Now it was her time to grin, as her hand shot forward and she threw the small candlestick across the room. Shadowy fingers flickered through the air, trying to grab hold of the burning thing, but vanished as soon as the light hit them. She heard the thing roaring now, not laughing anymore, and knew that she had done something right. The candle was flying in an arc, and Bernadette held her breath. This would end tonight, she had promised. A last howl made the air around her shake before the flickering light touched the still shimmering blood on the ground. Bernadette heard the whoosh as fire suddenly shot up from the circle, and the demon's howl turned into a roaring scream. Hot air blew away the coldness, and in the burst of light, she could see a figure standing in front of the inferno. It was big, with elongated limbs, its hands outstretched toward the blood that was now blistering in the flames, as another scream shook the foundation of the whole building. Bernadette turned on her heel and started running toward the stairs. The monster behind her was screeching, flames were shooting up the walls, spreading around the old wooden hut. She didn't dare look back. The smell of burnt blood and wood reached her as she jumped up the winding staircase. It would try to save the contract, she knew, but it couldn't. Once it realized that, it would come after her. Bernadette raced up the stairs while the light started to catch up to her. She could smell her own hair burning and felt the heat of the fire in her back. The small hut down there would look like a part of hell already, with flames consuming everything at once. Bernadette reached the half-open door and felt her shoulder crashing into it as she stumbled into the hallway, followed by a plume of black smoke. More and more light was shining in her back. The flames were shooting out and setting the wooden panels alight. She coughed and stumbled, rolled over the expensive carpet, and came back to her feet. The flames in her back gave off enough light so that she could see all the pictures of her ancestors, clear as day. Their stern faces had softened. She could see some of them almost smiling at her. Another scream filled the air, coming from below, and Bernadette knew that the demon would now come after her. This place had belonged to it for centuries. Her family was nothing more than its plaything, a pet that had now shown its teeth. Bernadette coughed again as more black, acrid smoke filled her lungs. She needed to get out of there. Flames were racing past her along the walls toward the pictures of her ancestors. They would all burn. But in the whooshing of the fire, Bernadette could now hear it. Footsteps racing up the staircase toward her. She screamed and started to run. There were giant windows at the end of the hallway. She could see herself in their reflection, framed by the flames that were still spreading out from the winding stairwell. This was hell. The demon's domain. The howling and snarling in her back was getting louder, while the pictures at her side were melting and starting to burn as well. She wouldn't make it, some part of her howled. Bernadette closed her eyes. One of the old mirrors burst as she ran past. The demon howled, but now its voice was coming from the hallway in her back. She screamed as well and jumped as a wave of flames shot past her and touched the glass of the windows. Bernadette felt the pain breaking under her, its shards cutting into her as she tumbled out and looked back. The demon was in the flames, its hand still trying to touch her as she fell out of the window and into the night. She could see it, standing there in the inferno, howling in rage and anguish. Bernadette only managed to regain her senses as the blue and red lights filled the area and sirens blared all around her. The whole mansion was up in flames. Its pillars were shooting up toward the sky. She was crawling across the lawn, away from the inferno, while the fire roared together with the demon. This thing wouldn't leave her alone if it managed to stay here. she knew. But the contract had gone up in smoke. Bernadette felt the pain from her broken arm, the myriad of cuts and burns all over her body. This mansion would never be rebuilt, she promised herself. Her family's legacy was burning to the ground. But she was free. The curse had been lifted. Yet in the flames, she could still see it, standing there, looking out at her, waiting for God knows what. And as human footsteps closed in on her, and the screams of the first responders started to reach her, she could hear the thing as well, laughing, braying, rejoicing in the knowledge that she would never truly be free of its grasp.